So as you may or may not know, I'm taking this 2012 BMW X3 and turning it into a 500 horsepower sleeper. I've already done work to prep it for a tune, and some of that is captured in previous videos. For instance, I've changed the oil, transmission fluid, battery, and also made various aesthetic changes like adding a touchscreen display. In this video, we're going to actually add the JB4 tune, which will tweak the ECU to make more boost and more power. Along with the tune kit, we will be installing new spark plugs, ignition coils, and an aftermarket cold air intake. Okay, on to the install. The JB4 has an OBD2 connector which needs to pass through the firewall in order to plug into the OBD2 port. After pulling down the trim under the steering wheel, there was a nice rubber plug that I punctured to push the OBD2 cable through to the engine bay. I didn't get it on video, but I ended up having to drill to get the hole big enough so that the plug end would fit through. We'll just fill the hole with silicone when we're finished. And here we have the OBD2 cable routed into the engine bay. Now let's take some stuff off the engine to prep for the JB4 installation. The top trim pops up and out. Next, we'll remove the intake pipe. Loosen the pipe clamps. A longer screwdriver will help with the lowest clamp screw. Pop off the vacuum hose. Remove this one bolt. Don't forget the electrical connector. Of course, I broke the clasps for this vacuum tube. I sort of hate the choice of plastic for some of these connectors. They get brittle over time from the heat and break easily. I only broke one clasp, so I might try and fasten it back using some gasket maker. We'll see. Once everything's unfastened, you can work the intake pipe up and out. Note the connector on the back of the top end of the pipe. Some Torx screws hold the air intake cover on. We will discard this and the filter in place of our aftermarket intake filter. I bought the optional wireless smartphone kit so you can connect your phone to the JB4 over Bluetooth. You need to open the cover of your JB4 unit and plug it in with the serial cable. Two screws hold it in place. Once that's done, we can start plugging the JB4 into the engine. First, I plugged into the OBD2 cable that I ran from the cabin through the firewall. Next, I unplugged the T-map sensor. I couldn't really video it, but I ended up getting it off with the use of a screwdriver and a pick tool. I slid the pick tool up under the fastening tab and then used the screwdriver to push on the edge of the connector until it slid off. I then ran the rainbow patch connector down and connected that to the engine and connected the original BMW connector to the JB4 pigtail. Then I disconnected the map sensor, plugged the brown JB4 patch into the engine, and the original connector into the JB4 pigtail. Next, I did the same procedure to the fuel pressure connector using the black patch. You're probably seeing the pattern by now. Finally, I did the same thing using the blue JB4 patch to the boost solenoid. The instructions from Berger are very good and will be specific to what you ordered, so be sure to always refer to them first. You can see I've fastened the tuner box to the upper bracing. Okay, now on to the spark plugs and coils. I bought the one-step colder spark plugs as was recommended by the guide that I'm using. Link posted in the description. I also bought a new set of coils. These are just the OEM coils. The spark plugs had to be gapped. This is easy to do with like a $1 spark gap tool you can buy anywhere. To remove a spark plug, you first pop up the ignition coil cap and unplug the coil. Then, using a screwdriver, I popped the coil up and off the spark plug, breaking the suction. Note that to get the spark plugs out, I had to buy a special socket. It's 14mm, but needs to be thin-walled due to the narrow opening and the fact that the spark plug sits at a slight angle to the opening. I got this socket from NAPA for less than 20 bucks. It has this little rubber gasket that will grab the spark plug and will help it pull it out. With the socket on the plug, you can definitely see the angle at which the plug sits relative to the opening. The rearmost plug required that I loosen the cable guide and pull it out of the way. I didn't have to remove it completely, so that was nice. You can see here there is just enough clearance to wrench the plug out once the guide is out of the way. One thing to note on putting in the new plugs is to be sure to torque them to the correct spec. With the plugs and coils done, I was now on to adding the aftermarket intake from Berger. Fasten the filter to the intake. Slide it in place. It sits nicely in place of the old filter, drawing air from the original intake channel. There's a little fastener that you connect to the rearmost cover mount. The intake's quite easy to install and looks pretty cool. And that's it for the engine bay. Everything is in place and the covers are back on. There's one last task to do. Using a tube of silicone with a long nose, I filled the firewall hole in to keep the noise and the cold out. And now we're done. Time for a test drive in map 1. Let's see if we can cause the X3 to throw a drivetrain error. And sure enough, we got a drivetrain failure. It turns out that when you push more boost, the stock OEM blow-off valve can't really handle it and it reports that it's stuck open. I didn't expect this, but it looks like we'll need to get an upgraded blow-off valve now too. But as you can see, we're definitely making more power. There's still more work to do. Thanks for watching and I hope to see you in the next video.